The last update I have is regarding athletics. I had shared a memo from Mr. Rubin to myself, along with all the other things that we're working to COVIDize, from transportation to registration to teaching and learning, food service, technology, is also athletics. And this is one that is truly at the heart and soul for a lot of us. It's an opportunity. It's what brings students to school. It's their passion, family's passion, our passion. As you know, and I've shared some guidance previously from the MIAA and from DESE, the idea about making sure that when we engage in anything from teaching and learning and now to athletics, that we need to keep our students, our coaches, everybody safe. And such a complicated subject when you're talking from golf to field hockey to tennis and so forth. I mean, just, the calculus is incredible. Mr. Rubin, when he was with us last Wednesday, he shared that he would have a meeting the following Thursday morning, both he and Mr. Carboni, and that was with the SWICL, our league that we're in, and with principals and athletic directors. And they took a vote as a league and then revisited that vote this past Tuesday. So Mr. Rubin revised a memo for me this morning, hot off the presses, and sharing with you and sharing publicly this evening in terms of where we sit as a league right now. Right now, the league has decided that no athletic seasons shall start prior to October 5th, and the vote was based on a number of safety considerations and reopening plans for our member schools. And also as well, and when we talk about things changing and so forth, Mr. Rubin was helping to set up the tables among other things, and some things were changing around 3:30 this afternoon. Everything's a work in progress. But the vote that was taken for the league, the member schools will not sponsor middle school sports for fall 1 season of 2020. And Mr. Rubin could explain it better than I can, but they're staggering some openings for our fall sports. For example, in fall 1 would constitute golf, field hockey, cross country, and both soccers. In fall 2 would be football, unified basketball, and cheer. Now, with this vote, and my understanding as well is not only other school districts, but their Board of Health said that they would not approve or having sports until school was in session for a couple of weeks. We just talked at length about how difficult it is in terms of making sure that we have our cohorts and so forth. So before we add that complicated situation of athletics, we want to see how we're doing first. And so that's the direction in which our league was going. And there's a few other things that I had shared with you in terms of the MIAA coming out with recommendations for what they would call a COVID coach. In other words, somebody who would have some training to make sure that while the coaches are coaching our student athletes, that we have somebody who is, and we have a part-time trainer, but somebody who's really focused on making sure that everything's sanitized, that when those balls come back in, or the goalposts, or whatever it is we're moving, is sanitized, so that it's a quality check, because we know, particularly, you get lost in the moment in sports, you get lost in the moment in the classroom. What I really appreciated from Mr. Rubin and Mr. Carboni, they had developed an athletic handbook as well, which was quite comprehensive, and I believe we'd shared that with you folks, I believe previously. If not, it's attached to a link here. Here's the part where I'm going to step out of my element, but we'll see what we do. The MIAA across the state divides the state into 9 districts. Uxbridge is part of MIAA District 2. And within District 2, the MIAA is looking at dividing towns or school districts, not by their league affiliation, but by the geographic location. So conceivably, they could say, Uxbridge, you, Northbridge, Hopedale, and pick somebody else, Blackstone, Millville, you folks are going to be in a geographic pod. Because chances are, if you're white, we're white, or if you're yellow, and so forth, and you would play just those 4 or 5 towns. And that way, too, that helps with contact tracing, that, but it's, so that would be beyond league affiliation. That hasn't happened yet, and will be happening soon, is my understanding. Also, too, is the, I think Mr. Rubin and I could invite up if there is a specific question. But this is where we're at now, and there is...
I could sum up some of that district. You had the district stuff. When I use the word district,
Yeah.
I'm using the term to make our geographic district. So timeline-wise, this is where things exist right now. First of all, to go back to a couple things Dr. Tiano said, first of all, the issue regarding middle school sports was that in our league, of the programs that we typically compete against, those towns are not sponsoring middle school sports. There were 2 of us, that Uxbridge being one of them, that said we had the wherewithal to potentially offer it, but we were going to be one of only 2 in the room that were going to even be able to consider it, and geographically it was not going to make sense. The 2 of us to play each other in everything in middle school sports, and Mr. Marco and I have been in touch with that for the last 3 months, because that's one piece of it. The second piece of it has to do, as you heard from Mr. Hyde, about transportation. The second part of our meeting, prior to discussing anything about when we were going to have a start of season, was there was significant conversation about whether we would have sub-varsity sports at all. Part of the reason for that is the very challenging issue of transportation. The transportation guidelines that are in place for the district as a whole are in place for athletics. And so if we have a bus that can only hold 15 kids, and your soccer team, I coached soccer in high school for 12 years, we always carried 18 kids on the varsity to 20, that's already 2 buses. And Mr. Hyde's been dealing ad nauseum with the nuances of transportation. We also have to be able to ensure that we have assigned seats, that we have space for the equipment, that we have all of the transportation guidance that goes into the district as a whole now flows to athletics. And some of the schools were saying, we simply cannot afford to have 4 buses for one road game, for one team, if that's what our numbers demand. And then you run into the issue of, well, you have a varsity coach, you maybe have a JV coach, but now you have 2 other buses, and do you have somebody supervising them? On our regular transportation, we do not. We don't have bus monitors, but we have coaches on buses, right, in the aftermath of games, which led to another conversation about, do we suspend some of the rules about transportation? Do we put it on parents? Do we allow student athletes to transport themselves to the games, which is explicitly forbidden in our handbook? So that's a whole other can of worms. So the tentacles of this got really complicated really fast. The decision about the October 5th date, I'll speak to it specifically because there's been some misinformation out there. That was a league vote because there were a number of schools in our league who are not going to have all of their students in the building until the last week of September. We're not one of them, and I understand that, but, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound when you're a league. It was a majority vote. It wasn't a unanimous vote. And we agreed to abide by the decision that's made as a conference, as a league. The added complication of that, the MIAA, I sit on the sports medicine committee, their recommendation from day one was that there would be no practices of any kind until your students were back in session. So that puts us off until September 21st, the Monday after school begins, minimally. That is the first day we would have been allowed to practice. People have thrown out September 10th, September 14th, September 18th. Ours was going to be Monday, September 21st. For some schools in our league, it was going to be September 28th. Others, it was going to be September 30th. And others, it was going to be October 5th. My responsibility, I'm a coach. I'm a former student athlete. I'm a former three-sport captain. I want nothing more than for the sports to happen. The added complication that we had is now that we were told by our district, now not you district, but the geographic district 2 that we're part of, that we have to notify them of our intent to participate in the Fall 1 season in whatever sports we're intending to participate by Friday. Because then the district scheduling committee is going to divide us up based on who's participating in what and by geography. Now, for Uxbridge, the challenge we have within our own district is threefold. One, school size. We want to participate against schools that are in similar size, and in our league, there's a range from Tantascwa with 1,100 kids to Oxford, David Prouty, and Quabog, which have less than 400. And so while Tantascwa is next door to Quabog, having them compete with each other doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's one challenge. So for us, the only geographic program that we have that is kind of close to us and kind of competitive with us is Northbridge. Because the other schools that are around us are not in our league. And so the challenge that came up today at 3:30, before any of us were going to know any of this, to be very honest, was what if our pod, our teams that we play with, are not Southern Worcester County League schools, and they've all decided to start at another day, and that day is earlier. That will in fact change some of our thinking, and it will change the thinking of our league. But it does not change the fact that we have to get our kids back in school first. And I'll go to the grave with that the most important thing we have right now is making sure that when we put those kids on a field, and we put those kids on a bus, that we have vetted every single one of those protocols to the same degree of fidelity that we've done everything we've done in this school. I don't know that today because, as I said, things that were released to us last week have changed. I'm on the sports medicine committee. The modifications for the sports that we have been given for something as simple as staggered starting lines in cross-country. We can't use the cross-country course that we have here. We have to remap our entire cross-country course because parts of it are not wide enough. We have to be able to do that to a T. Mr. Carboni, I tell you, he has been a rock star for the past 2 or 3 weeks. We're identifying practice schedules that get teams off and another team on without crossover, because the cohorts, we're so worried about cohort cross-contamination, but now we're putting cohorts out there together. And because we're using some of these spaces as classrooms during the day, another layer of this, and this is very real, is we have to work with our business office to ensure that they're appropriately sanitized to make sure classes are ready to go the next day. The last point that I'll make really has to do with boards of health and contact tracing, and this is a real complication and something that I've stolen from a couple districts, District 4 and 5, which are closer to Boston. They are scheduling their programs so that everybody plays on the same day. So for example, it's October 10th, and Uxbridge is playing Hopedale. We are playing Hopedale in everything. Because if there is a challenge of any kind with respect to contact tracing, it now only impacts 2 schools. It helps with transportation. It helps with families trying to go to one particular place rather than having one team in Hopedale and one team in Blackstone Millville. But that won't be decided until we know who's playing what. And quite frankly, I don't know the answer to that today. So that's where kind of the big picture for athletics is. I will tell you that I'm kind of disappointed that there's a lot of misinformation out there. Our intention, publicly, privately, to you as the committee, was to give you the update of where we were yesterday with the principals, and then send something out to the families after we've had an opportunity to send something out to the families tomorrow, to be able to say, this is where things are, and this is what the intentions are, and then starting to work with the business office and the transportation and everything else to make sure that we're ready to go. That was the time frame we planned on going. So,
Thank you.
if you have questions about any of those meetings, where they happen next, what happens next, I've been pretty immersed in it, as has Mr. Marco, as has Mr. Carboni, since probably June, with getting ready for this season.
I do have a specific question for Uxbridge, and I don't know if it's Dr. Tiano or you that will be able to answer this. The Board of Health had instituted a limit on gatherings on town property. Has that limit been revoked to allow for us to start having athletics, or is that still in place?
Schools are exempt from that. I'm not sure if the local policy, I'm sorry.
No.
The governor's order about gathering, schools are exempt.
But the local Board of Health has a specific policy for Uxbridge limiting gatherings on town property.
We would need to have any protocol, procedure, sport modification that we were to have vetted by the Board of Health. And to give you an example of one of the procedures we would put in place for fans to be able to come to games, because the other part of our conversation this past week as principals was no fans. We'll find a way to stream games, but no fans. And I feel like there's a better way around that. We are talking about issuing a lanyard to every single student athlete that goes to one parent or two parents to come to every game, and we are going to go out there and paint spaces and label spaces on the sidewalk and on the, like we did for graduation, and in the stands. Because if somebody is sick, we need to be able to say, who booked space 3? Oh, that was the Tiano family. Oh, they were sitting next to the Hyde family, and we need to be able to tell that to the Board of Health. We need a seating chart for every single classroom. That's what our COVID coach is going to do. They're going to sit there and make sure at practice who's there, who's not. Attendance becomes not some, I coached track. I had 130 kids on my team and never really knew where every single kid was at times, because you'd say to your distance runners, Mr. Hyde knows as a cross-country coach, okay guys, go do your 5 miles. And who was in which group? Well, we need to be able to define that like that for Dr. Black if there's an issue. It's really, really complicated. Not impossible, not something we're not going to do, but really complicated.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I had several, and both of you gentlemen could probably help enlighten me on this. So we have no middle school sports teams that we're supporting. So I have a 7-year-old that's engaged right now with the soccer program. So can he not participate, him being a middle school student?
No, it would be interscholastically, that we're not going to have like a Whiten Intermediate School cross-country team.
No, correct. So, but I'm saying he's playing on JV, so we have 7th graders that play JV.
Oh, there are no waivers for middle school kids to come to the high school, no. None, for any of the sports.
So if we'd had them in the past, they're not available this
They're not available this year. The MIAA is not supporting any waivers. They're trying to get us away from cooperative teams. We have a cooperative hockey team, we have a cooperative wrestling and we're supposed to have cooperative girls lacrosse with Northbridge. That is going to be revisited at our October meeting.
Okay, so for those families who fit in that bill, we'll be able to reimburse them accordingly.
Yeah, oh yeah, 100%.
Okay, that's 1. 2, so fall one is, just refresh my memory, we got soccer, we got field hockey.
It's the 2 soccers, field hockey, cross country, and golf.
Okay.
The fall 2
Yes.
will run from February 24th till March 31st, and it is football, competitive cheer, and unified basketball.
Okay, so
Is that arena football? Like, what part of the country do we live in?
And-
I'm so
and
sorry. I have to laugh at that.
And there are three schools in our league who have already decided to move soccer or field hockey or both to Fall 2. I found that out before I came in here today.
Wait, that's an SWCL?
Yes,
Individual
schools that have decided, we're not even going to try Fall
Okay,
1,
but-
we're moving. For example, one of our local schools said yesterday, the only two sports we are going to do during Fall 1 are cross-country and golf. Soccer, we're moving to the spring.
So, my next question fixates, so to the whole thing about distancing with buses. Okay, so soccer roster, 22 max. You already mentioned dealing to a football roster. You
Yep.
need 4 buses.
At least.
Okay, so question that I have is going from Fall 1 to Fall 2, we're going to be playing with the same rules, or are we looking at
I
a
don't-
dynamic situation here?
The MIAA Board of Directors is scheduled to meet on October 26th or 7th, I don't have it off the top of my head, to determine rules for winter. So we've forgotten all about winter, and right now, I don't want to make anybody really upset, but basketball and ice hockey are in the high-risk category, and I'm praying, somebody said the other day, well, there's always winter track, that's not a high-risk sport. I coached winter track. Have you ever been in a winter track meet? I mean, there's kids everywhere, people piled on top of each other in a field house. That went from low risk to high risk once people pointed that out, like that. And you usually have, I wish Mr. Carboni were here, but the 2 or 3 times I went to a winter track meet last year, all 8 teams were there. So now you're talking about the Northbridge Fieldhouse with 8 teams. Well, you can't have that. So is winter track even going to be a reasonable suggestion? Because we're saying we have to have masks indoors at all times, but you can't run winter track indoors in those conditions with a mask. So October 27th is our next day where we'll get the guidelines for winter sports, and I'm nervous. I am really nervous. The other thing that I'm really nervous about is, I'm just being fully transparent, is we have a geographic pod of us, let's say it's us, Douglas, Northbridge, Blackstone, Millville. We're the ones that are really close together geographically. And what if one of our towns has a spike and has to cancel its season? We're not replacing those games. It's not like we can go out and then replace those games. That's real. And some people have said, well, you're threatening that. That's not a threat. Like, that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that we're hanging in the balance and we're counting now on the other programs to also be doing the right thing. So those are some of the things that I know the principals have thought about globally. And with winter sports, one of the things that we're going to be waiting on are, what are those guidelines for those high-risk indoor sports going to be? Are we going to be allowed to have basketball? You've all been to a basketball game. The benches themselves are kids sitting right up on top of each other for longer than 15 minutes. I mean, that's the sport. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have basketball, but we're also not testing everybody every single day. I have a friend who works for the Patriots. He gets tested twice a day, so he can be allowed into Gillette Stadium. We don't have that capacity.
So, and I'm just going to put this out there as an observation, and I fully understand the angst and aggravation that you're dealing with in the capacity with,
Thank you.
Swissel. Uxbridge, we're a smaller town. Okay, we have a lot of student athletes that they may not be D1, they may not be D2, but a lot of them are like D3. Now, mind you, these are not scholarship opportunities, but these are kids that they get a look. They'll get a look from Nichols, they'll get a look from Tufts, they'll get a look from, URI, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And whatever we can convey to them, and I say it for the standpoint that if them as athletes looking for collegiate opportunities to extend both either academic or, themselves, if they need to go to a club, environment or whatever, that we try to work with them and, try to be as transparent with the information that we're deciding, and I know it's live. I know everything we're dealing with is live and just happening hour to hour. But whatever we can do, especially for the, seniors is a little, mostly for the juniors, for the seniors, many of which it's too late already, whatever we can provide to them in that realm, let's try to do it, because I've had multiple conversations with parents of senior athletes here in Uxbridge that, I mean, their aggravation is just through the roof right now, from what they were looking at last year to what they're dealing with right now with their students, with their kids.
And just so you know, the intention from day one was for us to have about a 12-game season for the fall. I mean, that's realistically what we would have been able to look at. We were able to use some of the latitude in the guidance from the MIAA that we're going to schedule games all the way through to November 20th, which is the last day that we're allowed to schedule. So while there won't be a postseason, we're going to treat our season as if everybody had that postseason, because we're starting later. Whether it's September X or October 5th. And I'm saying that because I don't know what pod we are in yet, and that will have an impact on some of our decision-making, and I'm being, again, very transparent. However, our plan was always, we're going to get 10 to 12 games in, depending on the pod, depending on what the district scheduling committee says. The challenge we run into is, let's say we're in a pod with 4 other schools, we're going to play them each 3 times, that's 12 games. If one of them bails out, it's a 9-game season. There's no makeup games. There's no, well, let's go find somebody from another pod. That's just not going to happen, and I understand people are frustrated. My own kids lost their spring. They're on the verge of losing their fall. I get it. But we're trying to save some sort of season. I truly mean that. And there are other leagues in the state. The Northeast Conference is one of them. Now, the Northeast Conference, geographically, Lynn, very high-risk place. Saugus, located next to Revere, which is also very high-risk place. They've already canceled their fall. They made it fall 2. They said, we're not even going to try. But I don't feel great about fall 2. As Mrs. Stark said, like, we're going to play soccer in February. Like, it's not ideal. We're lucky. We have a turf field. But for our league, not ideal. So we're going to push forward. We're still, again, trying to do what's best. We have all of our procedures lined up. Our hope, like I said, is to get some guidance on where we are as a geographic pod, and then be able to release to the families, this is when our seasons will start. Our league has made the decision of October 5th, but we've also got the consideration that if you're not playing anybody in the league, and this has become a district decision, we have to have some flexibility. So I've been saying this to everybody, for every email I have says, thanks for your patience. Because like you said, it's live, it's fluid. It changed between 12:30 when we spoke and 3:30 when I came in here to help set up tables.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Rubin.
Rubin.
Yeah, thank you.
If there are questions, I can.
Anything else? I did have one question on, you had spoken about snow days, Dr. Tiano.
Yes.
So is